My name is Paul Rusesabagina. I am the house manager of the most luxurious hotel in the capital of Rwanda. A place that my family and I happily called our home until the day everything changed.
When you watch a film like Hotel Rwanda, I think the average viewer is instantly gripped by its trauma aesthetics and the overall hysteria that permeates through the screen. As a viewer who's coming into contact with the Rwandan genocide for the first time, it is easy to assume that Terry George's film is an accurate representation of the past. However, as a historian, we have to be more critical of this representation and consider how the film's based on a true story trademark has implications. The film instantly sets up viewers to think a certain way about what happened in Rwanda in 1994. The movie starts, the screen is black, and an ominous black voice is heard on a Rwandan radio programme describing the Tutsis as cockroaches.
Now they have come back, these Tutsi rebels. They are cockroaches. They are murderers.
I think this is perhaps where Terry George makes his first mistake, as he avoids dealing with the full political and historical context of genocide. The conversation between the journalist and a Rwandan about the differences between the Hutus and Tutsis make it seem as if it's merely their different physical characterizations that draw the ethnic boundaries between them. However, as Michael Barnett highlights, the differences do not lie solely in their genes, but rather a fluid mix of social processes that create and institutionalize the separate identities. Hutu-Tutsi antagonism has its roots in the colonial days, and I don't believe the viewer is informed enough about this. Instead, the viewer is taken straight to the point where the Hutus want to kill the Tutsis, portraying the Hutu as the savage and the Tutsi as the victim. However, I would say that Terry George does well to begin with a radio broadcast from the RTLM station. Historian Linda Melvin highlights that the radio had been an integral part of a campaign to demonise the Tutsi. So I would say that the radio broadcast gives an accurate representation of the sort of atmosphere permeating Rwanda at a time where genocide was near. However, the film is somewhat misguiding its viewers, as it is too quick in assigning labels to victim perpetrators. According to Keith Snow, the RPF pro-Tutsi media that operated in Rwanda after 1991 was as equally dehumanising and vicious as the RTLM, but the film does not show this. It was in fact the RPF that invaded Rwanda from Uganda, committing a gross violation to international law. The dichotomy portrayed by George even convinces the viewer that the Hutus are wrong to blame the Tutsi rebels for shooting down the president's plane, when everything suggests that they did. Therefore, the nature of the Hollywood movie, when understanding of the force of good and evil are more accessible through the presentation of good and bad guys, prohibits the viewer from accessing the nuances of the Hutu-Tutsi conflict. Speaking of Hollywood's good and bad guys, perhaps we should focus on Don Cheadle, who plays the role of Paul Rusesabagina. His place in the genocide is shown to be one in which he acts the hero, providing refuge within the Hotel de Mille Collines and risking his life to save that of others. There are always implications when a Hollywood actor like Cheadle has to take on the role of a real-life figure and almost revive him again as a person, as he was in 1994. I think in this sense, Don Cheadle was extremely successful, adopting the persona of Paul insofar as to even assume the African accent. However, I think in a film like Hotel Rwanda, where a genocide is explored, there is a Hollywood tendency to create these larger-than-life pictures of the great man in history to satisfy the audience's request for revenge. Men such as Alfred Nadiro, who interviewed 74 survivors of the hotel, suggest that perhaps Terry relied too heavily on Paul's testimony and ignored other competing stories. A Rwandese woman even branded Paul as a liar, saying that, contrary to what is shown in the film, Paul made life hard for refugees. This is supported by memos and documents written by the crisis committee of the hotel, suggesting that Paul even demanded payments for rooms. Paul's role was emphasised to such an extent that the viewers are deceived into thinking appeasement skills, good connections and a few cigars could save people from the terrors of genocide. In fact, there was some instruction from the US government demanding that the refugees at the hotel not be harmed. Therefore, if we measure the extent to which the director portrayed Paul successfully in Hotel Rwanda, we could say that he achieved this goal as far as the testimony of the real Paul allowed him to. I would say that the Western concept of heroism in representing an African experience somewhat blinded Terry to other figures of the time who may have been just as worthy of the same title. A lot of comments about the portrayal of the West in the UN were also made after the release of the film. A particular scene stood out to me in regard to this, one in which...
You should spit in my face.
Excuse me, Kenneth.
You're dirt. We think you're dirt, Paul.
Who is we?
The West, all the superpowers, everything you believe in, Paul. You're black. You're not even a nigger.
The dramatic essence of this scene leads the viewer to believe, perhaps falsely, that the UN's lack of actions were merely based on racist notions. However, as Barnett suggests, the UN had other responsibilities and obligations, such as the disastrous US intervention in Somalia in 1993, which stimulated a phobia in the US of handling casualties in far-off lands. Therefore, I would say that depicting the UN and the US in a solely racist light is inaccurate. Nonetheless, the film does well to highlight the lack of help Rwanda received from the UN, and in his book, Romeo Dallaire, a man who was active in Rwanda at the time, states that the genocide is a story of betrayal. I think Terry George captures the ways in which the UN betrayed Rwanda successfully in the film, particularly in the scene where nationals are evacuated from the hotel, leaving Paul outside in the pouring rain. Nevertheless, it's the UN who are shown to evacuate Paul and his family at the end of the film, when his family were actually transported by the RPF. Here, Terry George is shown to use his artistic license to diverge away from even the real Paul's testimony of events. And in this sense, Hotel Rwanda really is a history with a Hollywood ending. Whilst the film critiques the lack of Western intervention, it also portrays them as the only ones that can save Rwanda. When dealing with an event as traumatic as genocide, a director like Terry George must decide as to how much of the ugly realities of genocide should be portrayed on the big screen. Anne Kaplan suggests that Hotel Rwanda seals over traumatic ruptures. For example, we see a typical massacre scene through the video footage of the journalists. However, it is distanced by the extreme long shots and further minimised by the small TV screen. The nearest Hotel Rwanda arguably gets to showing the horror of the genocide is when Paul and Gregoire drive over the miles of dead bodies scattered over River Road. But even here, the director mitigates the impact of the scene through the softening effect of the fog. This leads us to question whether Terry George has portrayed a far too sanitised version of genocide to make it bearable for the viewer. However, this would be unfair to say, as I believe that aesthetic distancing in portraying the full horror of the genocide has not only the viewer in mind. I think Terry acknowledges the limits to aesthetic representation of the precariousness and terror of the genocide, and that a Western Hollywood film is not in a position to portray the collective vulnerability of the Rwandan population. Therefore, although Terry George does not perhaps communicate the bloodbath of the genocide and does seal over traumatic ruptures, this does not make Hotel Rwanda unrepresentative of the past. He certainly makes up for it by capturing the psychological terror of the experience. Overall, Hotel Rwanda successfully introduces the Western audience to a general outline of the Rwandan genocide as a part of African history. It does well in uncovering aspects of the genocidal past that are not frequently discussed, bringing a reality check to Westerners regarding the UN's lack of involvement in the genocide. Nonetheless, I think Terry doesn't pay enough attention to historical nuances and context, particularly when it comes to the representation of the Hutu-Tutsi conflict. What's more, I feel that it's not the lack of violence in the film, but the intense focus on the exceptional individual that draws attention away from the overall historical past. The uplifting ending perhaps also underplays just how traumatic this slice of the African past really was.